Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm great. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right. Are
Awesome.
you a Christian or a Bible believer?
Yeah, I am.
All right, cool. And how long have you been one?
Pretty much my whole life.
All right, awesome, awesome. What do you think about the background? Do you have any thoughts of any of the topics?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely you make some good points here. So obviously, it does mention slavery in the Bible. Um, and there's a lot of debates and discussion about, oh, like what should we or shouldn't believe in the Bible. Personally, in a way, I believe, the entire Bible is God's word and it's all true. However,
Okay.
the Old Testament, meaning like Old Covenant, was, the old law given to, the Jews before Christ. And then the New Testament is what we live by today. So while the Old Testament is still technically true because it was followed back then, it should not necessarily be fully acted on today.
Okay. I've heard that before, and I can understand that perspective. To me, though, I don't think that that matches when I read the Bible. When I read the Bible, I see that the laws given in the Old Testament by God, who is
Hmm.
supposed to be perfect, just, and unchanging. So this is the law that he gives on how his people ought live and be a good and godly nation.
Hmm.
Then that implies that those are the unchanging things that God thinks people ought do to be
Okay.
as godly as possible on this earth, on this in even in this fallen state that we're in. This is the closest that we can act godly, and
Sure.
that's what he calls you to do. And then I
Sure.
also look at Jesus and what Jesus teaches.
Hmm.
I'm sure you've read the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So the Sermon on the Mount, after all the pretty, blessed are the meek and all that stuff, we read Jesus with his own mouth saying that he did not come to abolish the law of the prophets. He came not to abolish but to fulfill them.
Hmm.
And then he says that until heaven and earth pass away and until all is accomplished, the law stands. Not one stroke of a pen will be taken from the law. And therefore, you must keep them and teach others to keep them as well, to be great in the
Hmm.
kingdom of God. And we know that not all has been accomplished. There are still things in the Bible that we are waiting to come about.
Sure.
Revelation, all of Revelation, for example. But there are
Hmm.
still things that even are quote unquote messianic prophecies that Jesus still has yet to fulfill. You know, he
Right.
is not reigning as a king in the land of Israel like the messianic prophecies say. That's still something
Yeah.
that needs to be fulfilled. And then also, the new heaven isn't here, the old earth is
Yeah.
still here. So, even by Jesus' own mouth, he is commanding the people of today that are following him to follow the old law. He put a stamp of approval on the old law multiple times, including, I'm not quite sure the Matthew reference, but in Mark chapter 7, when the religious leaders were taking the commandment, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long. Well, the reason why your days may be long is because the punishment for not honoring your father and mother was the death penalty. And then by the time they had gotten to Jesus' day, the religious leaders were like, well, we don't need to kill our kids anymore. We could just call it Corban. And therefore, this tradition was born to avoid following that command. And Jesus rebuked them for it and scolded them for it, saying that, they abandoned the commandments of God for tradition. So this is Jesus, again, putting a stamp of approval on the old law, even extremely harsh ones like stoning your kids to death. So it's not until later on, and I'm almost done. Thank you so much for your patience, by the way. Um, and it's not until later on when we get to Paul that we start seeing things like we're not under the law, we're under grace. So, and I think it's very convenient then that Paul then says, by the way, anyone who says other than this, let them be cursed. It seems very clear to me that Paul hijacked the religion in its infancy, and the people that are saying that, well, that's the old, covenant, and we don't need to follow that anymore, are taking the teachings of Paul rather than the teachings of Jesus, who very clearly, with his own mouth, approved the old law even to today. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I understand what you're saying by that, but you know, I feel like I'm not familiar with like Jesus saying, and I'm not saying it's not true, but I haven't heard before, him saying that the only believe in the old law, because I mean Jesus preached many things that according to the Pharisees, right, were against the old law. So I mean you could see that as a contradiction, which I mean I don't, because
Like what?
I feel, huh?
Like what?
Well, I mean, like him being the Messiah and him being God and like him doing all these miracles and him, interacting with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story of him interacting with the seminarian woman by the well, and how like she was seen as impure, and he was obviously a Jew. Interacting with her, that was seen as uncommon and bad to do, and he should have cleaned himself, but obviously he didn't feel that way. And him interacting with lepers and so on, he does many things that go against the Pharisees and the old law. So I mean
Sure.
I don't really.
I would agree with that because that is why they gave him the death penalty. You know,
Right.
um, he broke the law. He claimed equalness with God. According to the law, the Pharisees were correct in the judgment they gave him. They executed the blasphemer. Um, so I would agree with you that there were definitely because I would say that Jesus was not perfect. He did not keep the law, as much as people like to claim that he did. He he did fail, just like any other person, and he did obviously not um, interpret it all perfectly. However, he
Mhm.
does repeatedly say to follow the old law. And again, I'll direct you to Matthew 5, start in verse 17 all the way to, I believe, 20 or 22. And that is Jesus saying to keep the old law until heaven and earth pass away and until all is accomplished, which I think you did agree with me, has not come to pass yet.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
from the words of Jesus, his followers ought be following the Mosaic law.
Okay. Yeah, I see that, but you
Okay.
know, at the same
Can I
time,
ask you where you see that Jesus himself gave a new law?
yeah, I mean, I could find that for you, but just like
Sure.
taking the whole New Testament into context, like I will admit, like if you take it at base value, there are contradictions between the two, and that's just a fact. But without taking those contradictions between the two, like into context, you are going to find contradictions. But obviously, I don't believe that they are because they're different and meant for different times.
Do you think that that means God changes then?
Well, what I would say to that is no, he doesn't change, but he adapts, just like Adam and Eve, right? So there's a
But
difference
adapting is
between.
changing.
I wouldn't say that because listen, I think there's a difference because I'll use the beginning for an example. Um, you know, Adam and Eve, right? So I think there's a difference between God's plan and God's will, right? So God's will originally was for no one to sin, right? He told Adam and Eve, don't eat the apple, don't go against me. And the world was set up to be perfect, right? That was originally his will. However, God knew what was going to happen. Therefore, his plan doesn't change, but his will. So I'm just trying to figure out how to put this so you can understand. But his will is not never for us to sin. His will is never for us to sin. However, his plan can include us sinning because he adapts to our sin. He did that. Him planning for us to sin doesn't mean he wants that, right? That just means he's planning around that, meaning he's adapting. But all that adapting was truly done before any of us were even alive, because he already knew that. So when I say adapt, I don't mean like, oh, he adapted in the moment. I just mean like he's molding his plan around us and our free will.
Got you. Um, Another thing I would be curious if you could show me, where do you see free will in the Bible?
Free will.
Yeah, because
I could check that
I
for
think
you.
it's incredibly clear that we do not have free will. at least
Really?
according to the Bible. Yeah, I think that we can point to many examples of this throughout the Old Testament and even the New. And I think that Ephesians chapter 1 and Romans 9 state very clearly that it is up to God and not us. I think that we see
Okay.
that one, you need faith in order to believe, but
Mhm.
faith is a gift from God. God is the one who sends delusions to people so that they believe lies, just like Jesus spoke in parables specifically so that some people would not understand and therefore not be saved.
Sure.
Um,
Okay.
so it's something that we don't have the choice of. It even says we don't
Okay.
choose God; God chooses us. I
Okay.
think that you pointing out Adam and Eve is the first very clear example that we don't have free will. The Adam and Eve were punished for something that they did while they currently were made without the knowledge of good and evil. And without the knowledge of good and evil, I don't understand how you could reason between right and wrong for
Well,
yourself. And
because
therefore, how could they understand what obedience or what disobedience was, what death was, what sin was? Yeah, they could be told the terms, they could repeat the terms, but that doesn't mean that they understand it. And so, therefore, it seems like God very clearly set them up to fail. He wanted them to fail because He does want His plan to come out. And His plan is to bring Himself glory by having Jesus come down and quote unquote save everybody.
um, did you like? I was thinking about a response to the first part of what you were saying, and then I'll just give an answer to the second part.
Okay.
So yeah, you were saying about Adam and Eve. So yeah, like I mean, God still told them, even if they didn't understand completely. Their only singular rule was to not eat the apple, and
hmm
so are you saying that they did that because they did not have the knowledge of what would come, or are you saying they didn't have the knowledge of like anything else?
I'm saying that they did not have the ability to reason between right and wrong but for themselves because they did not have the knowledge of good and evil. They only had the knowledge of what was good. So they couldn't understand the concept of disobedience. They literally couldn't understand what sin was or what it was to disobey God. It's something that their cognitive ability lacked, and it wasn't something they gained until they ate the fruit, and yet they were punished for something that they did beforehand. And I think that you pointed out something really important. That they didn't eat until they talked to the serpent, and I think that that proves my point is that they were basically like children, or maybe even semi robots. We could even go, because they were given limited ability in their cognitive functions, and then told X, and they followed X. And it wasn't until God allowed something else to come and tell them something else that they then did that thing, because they couldn't understand, no, this is disobeying. They could repeat, oh, we were told not to. But again, where did the serpent lie? God knew that it would open their eyes. God knew that they would become like God in knowing good and evil. And then
Yeah,
God even
exactly though.
verifies that. And then God even acknowledges that later and kicks them out so that they will not gain immortality. Um,
Exactly, but that choice though, right? Like that was their chance to say no, and that is the free will there. Yeah,
but
that
they
having
didn't have the
not
ability.
no, but let me just say this. So
Okay.
having that choice, having the serpent there, having that ability to choose between good and evil, that is free will.
So free will is the ability to make a choice without forced outer influence. Would you agree?
Without forced what?
Without forced outer influence. Would you agree?
Sure.
Okay. So if you create somebody and you create them without the ability to cognitively reason this out for themselves because you have prohibited them from understanding or even being able to acknowledge what bad or evil was, how could that person have any free will?
Where do you see or like where have you heard that they didn't like have the ability to do that?
I
to
think it's
distinguish
I think
those.
it's very clearly common sense when we get from the text that they did not have the knowledge of good and evil until they ate the fruit. And again, you need to have the knowledge of good and evil in order to reason for yourself. Well, this is bad, this is good, and so therefore my decision is this. If
Sure.
you don't know if you're like, oh, this is good, and then you were presented with a B option and you had no idea what B was, and you didn't even know that bad existed,
Mhm.
how do you have all the information that you need? How do you have the ability to say, well, this is good, that has to be the opposite of good, which is bad? Again, this is something you need to know and be able to reason in order to
Sure.
reach the conclusion.
Yeah, what you're saying, that makes sense. Honestly, I'll probably have to get back to you on that because
Sure.
I don't really know too much besides what I've told you. So yeah, that's a good point. I'll get back to you on that at some point. Um, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to give you a couple of references. Sorry, I'm looking up one of them right now. Um, Romans chapter 9 talks about predestination and stuff. It gives Pharaoh as an example. Um, but very specifically in verse 16 it says, so it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who shows mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. So then he has mercy on whomever he chooses, and hardens the heart of whomever he chooses. Later
Okay.
down in 22, it says that what if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience the objects of wrath that are made for destruction? And what if he has done so in order to make known the riches of his glory for the objects of his mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for his glory, including us, whom he has called, not from the Jews, but only also from the Gentiles? So we have very clear that this is saying God has set this up since the beginning. Who is a vessel for destruction and wrath, and who is a vessel that is chosen and is good. God chooses us and puts us in our designed spots, and He will have mercy on whom He has mercy on. He'll harden the heart on who He hardens. And I'm sure you know that verse where, lots
Yeah.
of Christians are scared of it. Like, oh, turn, depart from me, I never knew you. Um, because God will do what he wants. He'll have mercy on who he wants, and he'll turn away who he wants because this has all been predestined. And the last thing that I want to say scripture wise is going to Ephesians 1, starting in verse 4. Just as he chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world to be holy and blameless before him in love, he destined us for adoption as his children through Christ Jesus according to the good pleasure of his will. The Bible shows multiple examples, and it shows Pharaoh as the clearest one, where God predestines people and sometimes will predestine vessels of wrath and destruction very specifically to bring about glory for himself. It seems very egotistical, and it seems to me evil to play with people's lives like that just to bring yourself glory. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying there, but how I see that at least is almost not a choice, but more of a acceleration of what was to come anyways. Like Pharaoh, like the verse, I forget if you mentioned it or not, but when it says, God, um, when Pharaoh let the Jews go out of Egypt, but then God hardened his heart, so he went after them again. Um, I would just say that's kind of, an acceleration or a strengthening of, his soul and what he truly believes and how he truly feels. I wouldn't say that's necessarily predestining him or, like choosing that already. I feel that's just accelerating how he already felt.
So when both Exodus and Romans say that God predestined Pharaoh and set him up in that position for this reason, you don't think that's what it means?
I didn't, could you read that part again? It didn't really sound like that.
Yeah, sure. I'll read you both, the one from Exodus and the one in Romans. Let me grab my Bible again. Sorry, I'm waiting for work to start, so I'm
No,
all
you're good,
working in
bro.
my car here. But
Yeah, you're good, man.
yeah. All right. So in Exodus chapter 9, starting in verse 16, for I have raised you up for this very purpose, so that I may show my power in you and make my name known throughout the earth. And then in Romans chapter 9, so it'll be easy to remember Exodus 9, Romans 9. Um, and I would recommend reading all of Romans 9, but starting
Mm.
in verse 16, or sorry, 17. For the scriptures say to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be proclaimed through all the earth. So
To be
it's
honest,
it's saying
that
that Pharaoh
that
has been
raised.
raised to that purpose, to that level, so that God could do this. God chose Pharaoh for this reason, and the
Okay,
reason is so that he could bring himself glory by really messing with Pharaoh.
that's 9. Verse 9. Yeah, honestly, this is just taking a guess, but that raised up is kind of like what I'm thinking about, and that could be. You said it's Exodus chapter 9, verse 9, or
It's Exodus chapter 9, and I think it's verse 16. Let's see, back to it. Exodus 9, yeah, 16. Do you have a preferred version
no,
that you
not really. You
use?
can use anything.
Okay. I usually use the NRSV or the ESV, so but I'm open to really any of them. But yeah, so it's Exodus 9:16 and Romans 9:17.
Yeah, the one I'm reading here, Exodus 9, you said verse 16?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know the whole well, I do know the context, but I haven't read it right now. But I'm just gonna read the verse.
Okay.
So my Bible says, "Instead, I let you live to show you my power, and so that my name might be proclaimed all throughout the earth." And then also in the other version, I think it was yours, there was a footnote, which I don't know if you count that or not, but it says, "Let you live." So it's almost seeing or seeming like it's meaning spared instead of raised up. But I'm gonna read it. Like I'm gonna read this whole kind of stanza
Sure.
here to see if that's what it actually means. Um, okay, so it's part of the seventh plague, so I'm just gonna read this to myself real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah. So if you look at the verse before that, or at least, or even like so 13 through 15,
Mhm.
it's saying like it's talking about the plagues, and it's
Mhm.
like God saying to them like I could have wiped you off the face of the earth, basically saying I could have killed you, but I'm letting you live so that I can show you the power of more than just these plagues, which I think it's what I think it's preluding to is the parting of the Red Sea, and then eventually, obviously, the chosen people being led to the Holy Land. But so I wouldn't say it's like predestination. It's more of him showing mercy because of the fact that he needs his plan to happen.
I don't see how it's mercy when he's intentionally hardening Pharaoh's heart so that he can continue bringing more death and destruction onto the people. And that's actually I see this as the opposite of mercy. He is whatever little limited will that humans have, God is literally intervening to ensure that he brings more death and destruction to Pharaoh and his people.
Well, the reason he's doing that, I mean, Pharaoh didn't back down until the 10th one. So,
Well, Pharaoh started backing down before that, and that's why God started hardening his heart. Because you'll notice that there are some points where it says, "And Pharaoh hardened his heart," And then there are other passages where all of a sudden God is hardening his heart. And God
The
started hardening his
only
heart when Pharaoh started trying to negotiate, okay, go do your holiday, which I think is very interesting that Moses lied to him, saying that they just wanted to go into the desert to do their God worship.
Are you talking about, did he say that before they escaped?
Yeah, yeah. Moses petitioned Pharaoh that they should that they to let the slaves go so that they could go into the wilderness and worship their God. And that's why Pharaoh started negotiating and going like, all right, well, what do you need to go? Like, do you need all your people? Can you leave some things behind to so I know you're coming back? But then God intervened, hardened his heart because he doesn't want Pharaoh negotiating or trying to let them go. He wants to still flex his power. He still wants to send more plagues. So he hardens Pharaoh's heart. So Pharaoh says no, and then God brings about another plague, and that's why in verse 13 the Lord is telling Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh and say to him." This is God telling stuff to Pharaoh. Um, God is telling Pharaoh that he's going to send more plagues on all the people and stuff like that. It is
Mhm.
God telling Pharaoh how he stretched out his hand and struck him and his people with pestilence.
Right,
And then God is saying that he is going to continue to let him live. Why? Because there's still more he wants to do. But
right.
again, this is, I don't know how this goes against anything in my position, especially when we see it repeated again in Romans 9, where again, you know how, and gosh, I forget the other passage in the New Testament where it says that all the government authorities in the world are God appointed. God sets them up. So God is literally taking credit, both in the Old and in the New Testament, that he put Pharaoh in this position. He chose Pharaoh for this. And the reason for it is so that he could bring all this destruction upon Egypt. And that way everyone could be scared and be like, ooh, look at that God. That God is, top dog.
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily say it's for that purpose. I mean that's just a like respectfully, that's kind of just like a guess or a presupposition. I would
Wait,
say
which part?
that you saying that he's doing this so that, like, to show like his power or whatever you
But,
said.
but that's what we just read.
Well, I feel like in
So
a way, I mean
to
he's
show my
continuing
power
this.
and make my name resound through all the earth. And then in
Right, but
Romans
I wouldn't
9,
say it's in an arrogant way. I would say that is to show that he is more powerful. Because Pharaoh at that time was seen by the Egyptian people as a god,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So he has to, if God really is the true one God, then he has to prove that to the Egyptian people themselves.
So again, he's doing this to elevate himself. He is bringing all this death and destruction
Why would he
to the
not do that?
citizens of a nation in order to elevate himself and make people know about him.
Yeah, so why would he not? So if you, why would he not do whatever is necessary if he is the true God? Why would he not do that?
Do you think it was necessary to kill a bunch of citizens and children?
I'm not God. I'm not God. I don't know.
Well,
But
I'm asking you.
realistically, in the most, if I had to take a guess, yes.
Okay, do you think that God was too weak or limited that he couldn't choose a different way?
I don't know. Again, like, I'm not God, so I didn't make that decision. He made that decision. He knew the best way to do it, and that must have been the best way. Because I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, the Nile he turned into blood. The Nile was seen as a god. Many things in their culture were seen as gods, so he had to slay them all, figuratively, because they weren't real. But you see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I get that, but I don't understand why that means that he has to then let the innocent citizens and children of the nation of the government that he is beefing with that have to
Uh-huh.
suffer.
Uh-huh.
Because again, let's say that this is God and he's real and this is what he did. I have to conclude that he truly, for some reason, couldn't think of a better way when I could think of better ways to make yourself known throughout the earth and show how cool you are. And two, I would have to then conclude that this is not a good God.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, especially because of all, the other things. I mean, I feel like this they're being led astray at this point, right? I mean, they're again assuming that this God is real and that
Mhm.
his ways are true, then again, like I said before, like he would do whatever is necessary. Um, and sure, I'm not saying that it's easy. It's never easy to justify the killing of people. I mean, especially, like firstborns of Egypt, of course, and, the systemic killing of them is obviously something to take seriously, right? But, you know, if we truly believe that, God is all good, then he must have known that, this, moral tension here was necessary and that this grief possibly could have made the Egyptian people wake up and say, "Hey, Pharaoh isn't real. These gods haven't protected us. Our way of life is a lie. What we've been taught and told is a lie. Maybe whatever is doing this to us has something to offer." And that's it's like one of the best things like you can think of, right? Because of how extreme it was. Like think about this. If just say I'm wrong and I've been taught that, the Bible's true, whatever. And but actually, there's another God out there, um, who is true, right? But I'm stuck in my ways. I would never believe something else, right? Which I wouldn't. But what is the most eye-catching way? Again, I'm not God. Like, I don't know this, but like, I'm just kind of attempting to go through the thought process of God, which is even crazy to say. That's crazy, right? For me to have to go through the thought process of God, because I'm not God. But there would have to be extremes. Extreme measures would have to be taken to completely change an entire society to even think about something that they've been taught for years and years and years and years and years. For them to change their entire beliefs, their belief system, their way of life, their farming, like how they do everything. Like literally everything is based around gods in Egypt. So in order for God, the one true God, who is singular, not plural, because Egyptians thought there were many, he is the singular one. I mean, there's got to be some series of actions that are serious enough to catch the eye of the Egyptian people. And killing the pharaoh, and along with all of the other quote unquote gods, and the firstborns was, I mean, the way to do it.
Do you think that if we have someone and everyone's like, wow, Mr. So and so, he's, a great guy. You'll never meet a nicer person. We'll give you the shirt off his back. Always knows just what to say. He was there for me in this hard moment, and he helped so and so out when her husband died. All this shit, um, all these good things. Showing this person in a great character, and
Hmm.
then we see that person doing terrible things. And just beating children,
Hmm.
offing people. Telling people to go and off kids, all that kind of stuff. Would we then
Hmm.
be able to say, well, we have to trust that that person's good? Or should we
Well,
look
guess
at that
what?
person's actions and say, clearly, this person isn't good? It doesn't matter what is claimed about him. We need to look at the actions and judge those. Is that not a logical position to take?
We're a human, yeah. Like, but this is a God we're talking. This is
Why,
the God
why
we're
is
talking
God
about
exempt? Why is it logical for a human but not for God? Where is the difference?
because a God is all knowing. This God is all knowing.
Okay. Do you hold to all the omni properties or just all knowing?
What other ones are you referring to?
He's everywhere at once, all powerful and all knowing. Some people
Yeah,
like to
I
include
would
all loving, but not everyone does.
I would agree with all of those except for all loving. I'm not sure exactly what you
Okay.
could mean by that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's all right. I just wanted to clarify because some people only hold to like 3 out of 4 of those usually, so I just wanted to know. Um, okay, well, then I don't understand why God would be limited to doing atrocities, especially if he wants to claim a good nature. Like when he gave this perfect law, he does have the command in there. I mentioned it earlier, where if your child dishonors you, like if you just speak verbally attacking your parents or physically attack your parents or dishonor them, they should be the first ones to lay hands on you, take you in front of the courts, and then everyone is going to stone you to death. And that is the law that the Pharisees were ignoring, and Jesus rebuked them for not following, saying that they should be following it. Um, how do you think that that is a good and just law? And do you think that that's something that was ever okay to follow?
Do you know the verse to that? I mean, if you don't, it's fine. I can just look it up. But
Sure. But do you have a thought? Why
let
would
me
it ever
try.
be okay to stone your child?
Right. I mean, yeah, a lot of things. I mean, we could make the same argument about slavery, right? I mean, there are many things in the Old Testament which are questionable, and which many people, including Christians, question to this day. And I feel, like I said before, not that God changes. However, his plan and or laws can adapt. And that can be pre-planned by God, right? I mean, that doesn't mean he's changing, right?
Well, I would say that that could be pre-planned by God, and that's why Jesus is telling us that this law is staking until all is accomplished and until heaven and earth pass away, which we already said hasn't happened yet. So
Yeah,
the
okay.
things that
So
we're
wait,
talking
so you're
about
saying
are
that law
Exodus
is still
20.
around? It says
I'm I,
20.
I'm I'm saying that if you are a Jesus follower and you want to
Mhm.
follow to his teachings, Jesus taught to keep the old law, and very specifically talked about the one about stoning your kids for being
Okay,
rebellious
yeah.
or not honoring parents and stuff like that. So
All right, yeah, we can look
yes,
at it.
I would say that yes, you should be you should be trying to follow this law if you are a
All right,
Christ follower.
let's see. All right,
Yeah,
let's
so
look at it.
in Exodus 20, that's where we see the Ten Commandments.
Sure,
And it
yep.
talks in verse 12, honor your father and mother so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God has given you.
Mhm.
Um, and then we see in Exodus 21, in verse 15, whoever strikes mother or father shall be put to death. And then verse 17, whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death.
Wait, in Exodus 20?
Exodus 21.
Oh,
So
21, sorry.
yeah, the commandment of honor your father and mothers that your days may be long is in Exodus 20, chapter 12, or verse
Right.
12. And then in the very next chapter, 21, verse 15 and 17 talk about if you strike or just curse your mother and father, you will be put to death. Um,
Yeah, I
and
see that.
then, yeah, and then in Deuteronomy, chapter 21, Um, this also states in verse 18 that if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or mother and does not heed them while they discipline him, then this father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the gate of that place, and they shall say to the elders that our son that the son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey us, he is a glutton and a drunkard, and all the men of the town shall stone him to death. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear and be afraid. And then I'll take you to one more passage in Mark chapter 7. Um, Jesus, I'll just read this real quick. Start in verse 1. Now the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, and they noticed some of the disciples were eating and with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the markets unless they wash. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots, bronze kettles, and beds. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And he said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. Then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandments of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and whoever speaks evil of father and mother must surely die. But you say that if anyone tells mother or father, whatever support you may have had from me is Corban, that is an offering to God, then you are no longer permitted to do anything for father and mother, thus nullifying the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on. And you do many things like this. So this is Jesus giving a stamp of approval again on the Mosaic law, including um, killing your children for dishonoring
Yeah,
you.
I think I understand what you're trying to say here. Well, what I would say, and I don't think this contradicts you or what the verses you've read. I believe, or what, I mean, what it honestly seems like to me, is that Jesus, sure, is supporting and endorsing the law, right? He's endorsing the or however you said it, like confirming whatever. He's backing the law. However, I wouldn't say he necessarily backs the punishment for it, though. I mean, he definitely doubles down on, you know, respecting your father and mother and the other laws too, and that these laws should be confirmed and that they're true. But I mean, I again, like, I don't really see anywhere where it shows him agreeing with this punishment um
So he's
or
rebuking them for not following the law, but he doesn't want them to follow the law.
I'm just saying that the punishment, he didn't doesn't say anywhere that he endorses the punishment.
He's telling them to keep the commandments of God, and he's rebuking them because
Hmm.
they're not following the commandments. The commandment is if your son or your child is rebellious or doesn't honor you or whatever, you kill them. That is the law. And
Can you
I
say that again?
also and that also wasn't my question. My question is when was this ever an okay or just law to give?
Oh, that was your question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, again, like we could see in the Old Testament, like again, and this is where it comes in,
Why was it
where
okay in the
it's
Old
like,
Testament?
yeah, it's like a lot of things. Like I don't, again, I couldn't say, right, because I wasn't living back then. But from what we know now, obviously many laws in many different cultures and regions were different, a lot more extreme than today. Um, in any scenario. So I would say that during this time, again, I'm not a scholar on ancient Israeli Jewish traditions or whatever, but taking a guess, this was not a this was not like a surprise. Like this was not honestly could honestly be more forgiving than other cultures during this time. So I mean, if I had again, I'm not the most educated on this, but if I had to take a guess, it's because this is a common thing to do.
So what? Is God not better? Is God, if he's good, should he not have the best way? And if the best
Yeah,
way is just as barbaric as the honor killings we see in Islam, then I'm sorry, it's it's not good. And
that's what I'm saying.
I
That's
don't
what
know
I'm
how
saying.
you can claim it ever is good. But
Yeah.
I do want to thank you for your time. I have to get into work now. But I'll be up and around. I'll give you a follow if you ever want to come back. And if you missed any of the verses that we talked about, I am posting this stuff on YouTube. So later on in the morning, you'll be able to find it, and you can find any reference that we talked about to look into and come back with if you'd like.
Well, yeah, I followed you. I'll definitely come back. I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, I appreciate yours too, and I hope you have a good night.
Yeah, man, you too. See you later.
All right, take care. All right,